This is Today with James Naughtie and John Humphrys. It's 8 o'clock on Wednesday, the 16th of December. The news headlines this morning. Doctors and nurses in England are being told to change the way they treat dying patients by following their wishes. Controversial proposals to allow fracking under national parks are to be voted on by MPs. Schools in Los Angeles will reopen after a security threat which kept them closed yesterday was dismissed as not credible. And Prince Charles has been branded Britain's best-informed lobbyist after it was confirmed that he's been receiving confidential government papers. Today's newsreader is Caroline Nichols.
New guidelines for the NHS in England say patients who are dying should be treated according to their individual needs, rather than what's been described as a tick-box approach. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, or NICE, says a change of attitude is needed from health and social care staff. Here's our health correspondent, Adam Brimelow.
The guidelines were developed to provide a clear, humane approach to end-of-life care. They replaced the Liverpool care pathway, which fell into disrepute amid reports of fluids and medicines being withheld and patients being over-sedated. NICE's guidelines emphasise communication with the person who's dying and their family and friends, and also between clinicians to ensure the patient's wishes are understood and their care is reviewed at least once a day. They also recommend avoiding unnecessary tests. When in doubt, staff are urged to turn to more experienced colleagues for advice, though NICE says there needs to be better access to specialists. It says an improved approach to providing fluids would allow more people to die at home. Hospice UK has welcomed the guidelines, but says all too often conversations about people's wishes happen too late. It's called for better training with close partnerships between hospitals and hospices.
MPs will vote today on government plans to allow the extraction of shale gas from beneath national parks and other protected sites, as long as the drilling begins outside the area. Critics have accused the government of a U-turn after it pledged an outright ban on fracking in environmentally sensitive places. Our industry correspondent John Moylan reports.
The government wants to ban fracking at surface level in national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty and World Heritage sites. But deep underground, that's another matter. These regulations, which are expected to be approved today, would allow fracking in such areas below depths of 1,200 metres, around 3/4 of a mile. Firms would have to operate from outside of these zones, but would be able to exploit the shale gas within them. Greenpeace says that's a U-turn on the government's pledge earlier this year of an outright ban on fracking in these locations. MPs will vote on the issue today, but there will not be a full Commons debate. That's led Labour to accuse the government of using a parliamentary backdoor to put through weak regulations. In a statement, the Department of Energy said that the regulations would get the shale gas industry going while protecting the environment and people.
Professor Richard Davies from Newcastle University, who studies the environmental impact of fracking, told us he believed safeguards were in place to help prevent any problems.
What the government has said is that we will create a separation of at least 1,200 metres between the land surface and layers of horizontal shale. And that's because we know fractures from our research can only travel 600 metres upwards. And so there's a very large boundary of 1,200 metres that protects water supplies.
Schools in Los Angeles will reopen today following the security alert yesterday, which led to more than 1,000 being closed. Officials received an email warning of a jihadist-style attack, but the city's mayor said the FBI had concluded that it was not a credible threat. The authorities said they'd checked more than 1,500 sites and believed them to be safe. Peter Bowes reports from Los Angeles.
It was a menacing email, reportedly a threat to attack schools in Los Angeles with bombs and assault rifles. Based on the circumstances and with memories of the San Bernardino attack still fresh in people's minds, school officials reacted with, as they put it, an abundance of caution. But police in New York City, who say they received the same threat, dismissed the warning as an amateurish hoax. Classes were held in the city as normal. New York's police commissioner, Bill Bratton, said Los Angeles had overreacted. The mayor of Los Angeles has since said that the FBI has concluded that the threat to the city's schools was not credible. The school closures disrupted the morning routines of thousands of families. Some parents criticised the authorities for their response. Others applauded officials for putting the safety of their children first.
The Cabinet Office has disclosed that the Prince of Wales has been receiving confidential government papers. The details were made public after a 3-year battle by the campaign group Republic using the Freedom of Information Act. The chairman of the Cross-Party Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, Bernard Jenkin, told us the existence of the practice had been set out in procedural documents at the Public Records Office. Our royal correspondent, Peter Hunt, reports.
It's a once private practice which has benefited heirs to the throne since the 1930s, when Edward VIII was waiting to start his brief reign. For decades, Prince Charles, like his mother and senior members of the government, has received the minutes of cabinet meetings and of ministerial committees. It's not a privilege that's normally extended to elected junior ministers. A spokesman for the Cabinet Office said this had been established practice for many years, as it was important that the head of state and her heir were properly briefed. Critics of the future king see it differently. Republic, which campaigns for the abolition of the monarchy, said it was completely unacceptable, as it gave the prince a considerable advantage when pursuing his own agenda. The Labour MP Paul Flynn, who's called for a parliamentary inquiry, said this made Prince Charles the country's best informed lobbyist.
Scotland's Finance Secretary John Swinney will deliver his annual budget today. For the first time, he'll have to set an income tax rate, but it's thought he'll keep it in line with the rest of the UK. Here's our Scotland correspondent, Colin Blaine.
This is John Swinney's 9th budget, and it's the first time he's had to consider new income tax powers which force him to decide whether to raise or reduce tax in Scotland. With the Scottish election less than 5 months away, he's expected to play safe and keep income tax the same as UK-wide rates. Some local authorities, including Glasgow, have complained about the impact on jobs and services resulting from the SNP's long-running council tax freeze. But all the signs are that won't be changing either. John Swinney is working with a reduced block grant from the Treasury, but says he'll protect key priorities like schools, hospitals and police.
The frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination, Donald Trump, has been described by one of his rivals as a chaos candidate who'd be a chaos president. The criticism was made by the former governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, during the latest debate between Republican presidential hopefuls, which took place in Las Vegas last night. Mr. Trump insisted he was the most solid candidate and said he would not stand as an independent if he was not selected by his party. He defended his suggestion that Muslims should be banned from entering America and also said parts of the internet should be shut down to combat Islamic extremism.
I would certainly be open to closing areas where we are at war with somebody. I sure as hell don't want to let people that want to kill us and kill our nation use our internet. Yes, sir, I am.
The US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, will announce today whether it's putting up interest rates for the first time in nearly a decade because of the strengthening American economy. Many analysts are predicting a rise in the key rate, which has been at 0.25% for 7 years. A committee of MPs is warning of a looming crisis in further education colleges in England. The Commons Public Accounts Committee has accused ministers of being desperately slow off the mark in addressing financial problems. Our education correspondent, Robert Piggott, reports.
The Public Accounts Committee described the state of further education, which educates and trains 4 million people over 16, as deeply worrying. The committee said England's 240 further education colleges had the capacity to transform the life prospects of students, but too many were struggling financially, cancelling courses, not hiring staff and postponing investment. It said earlier government intervention would have prevented a sad and frustrating waste of students' potential. The Skills Minister, Nick Bowles, said the government would increase spending on further education by more than a third in the next 5 years and was reviewing the sector to make colleges more efficient.
Royal Bank of Scotland has confirmed that it will sell its Williams and Glyn banking arm in the first half of next year after attracting informal interest from buyers. RBS had been preparing to float the business. Williams and Glyn has 1.8 million customers. Sir Elton John has criticised websites which sell tickets to his shows at vastly inflated prices. He's joined a growing campaign against the practice, which is backed by some of the world's biggest entertainers, including Adele and Coldplay. Tickets for Sir Elton's UK tour next year have been on sale for up to 5 times their face value, even though the shows have yet to sell out. Speaking to the BBC News, he urged his fans not to pay so much.
I think it's disgraceful, and I just wish they wouldn't do it. I think I'd rather have empty seats. I think it's extortionate, and I think it's disgraceful. I mean, the fact that they were willing to pay that is fantastic, but I just think I'd rather them save their money and not come.
Elton John on ticket prices. It's 8:10 now. The Prime Minister reaches an important point in his promised EU renegotiation in Brussels tomorrow, when a summit of all the leaders will reveal whether he's made headway in the argument for change that he's been making for months in pretty well every European capital. It's going to be difficult. Critics at home, particularly Conservative Eurosceptics, say that he's already backing away from his pledge to make people coming to Britain from the rest of the EU wait for 4 years before qualifying for in-work benefits or social housing, and that is something that he put at the heart of his reform plan. This is the latest chapter in a story in which every Prime Minister has played a part over 2 generations or so, grappling with the tortuous and emotional question of this country's relationship with the rest of Europe. Throughout much of the 90s, it was the issue that defined the character of John Major's Conservative government and the state of his party, riven by the fundamental disagreements over Europe that had never been healed in the era of Ted Heath and Margaret Thatcher. Sir John Major joins us now. Sir John, good morning.
Good morning, James.
Do you think that David Cameron should decide his attitude to EU membership on the basis of this renegotiation?
Well, I think it's clearly important that there are changes made in the European Union, and that's what he's seeking to do. What does concern me a little is everybody is regarding Thursday and Friday as though it were high noon and everything was going to be decided then. Unless I very much missed the mark, I don't think it will be. It's a process. There will be discussion aimed at an agreement. That discussion will take place. Everybody will leave and state their own positions. But underneath that, there will be a movement either towards an agreement or against, and we won't really know about that until they actually come to the crunch sometime next year.
Well, that was a very elegant off-drive, Sir John, but it avoided the question. And the reason I ask it is that people around Downing Street are saying, look, don't doubt it. If the Prime Minister isn't happy with what he gets in this negotiating effort, then he's quite prepared to argue for Britain leaving the EU. And I simply want to know whether you believe that this renegotiation should decide David Cameron's view as to whether Britain is in or out.
Well, I can't put myself inside David Cameron's mind. I can tell you what my view is. My view is that this renegotiation is important, but that it shouldn't decide whether or not we remain inside the European Union because of the importance of the issue. But I have no means of knowing whether that is the Prime Minister's mind, and that's a question really that you need to address to him.
Well, you've said something very interesting there. I mean, from your perspective, whatever comes out of this renegotiation, you still believe that it is overwhelmingly in the national interest to be in, full stop.
Well, let me put it to you this way. You mentioned the troubles I had in the 1990s with my own party and with others. If there is anyone in the United Kingdom who really ought to be anti-European and thoroughly frustrated with them, then perhaps it ought to be me. Now, I am not a starry-eyed European. I did, after all, say no to the euro currency in the early 90s. I said no to the single market. And in 1996, I said no to joining Schengen when it began. So I am sceptical of a great deal of European Union policy. But flirting with leaving at a moment when the whole world is coming together seems to me to be very dangerous and against our long-term interests. We see America and Japan and other countries forming a trans-Pacific partnership. Now, of course, that's trade, but it's also common standards. It's bringing people together. The whole world is coming together. And for United Kingdom, 67 million out of a world population of 7 billion, to break off and head into splendid isolation doesn't seem to me to be in our interest now, or perhaps more important, in the interests of our children and our grandchildren and future generations.
You call it splendid.
So whatever the frustrations are, and whatever comes out of these negotiations, we are going to be able to continue to try and influence the European Union while we're in it. And one point that people tend not to realise, once this issue has been determined by the modern generation of Britons, if they decide that we should stay in, there will be those who will never accept it, of course.
As is traditional, the line has gone down to Sir John Major's radio card just when he was making rather a
very interesting point.
A central point. I can hear, this is the last time I'll say this, I can hear a terrible silence, and there is really nothing happening. So, John, are you there?
Well, look, shall we move on to the next
what
item?
What we'll do is the next item, and if we can get Sir John Major back, we'll come right back to him, because I'm sure he was in the middle of a paragraph there. So
indeed, he was.
We'll let him finish it.
Absolutely.
Why don't you carry on
let's
for a
do
minute?
that, and let's talk about Los Angeles. The schools there are going to be open today. They were closed, as you may know, yesterday, all 1,500 of them, because of a terrorist threat that turns out to have been a hoax. Steve Moore is a former FBI agent. He was head of the Al-Qaeda investigations in Los Angeles after 9/11. I asked him if he thought the authorities had been right to shut the schools.
Whether or not they had the information when they made the decision is what we still have to find out. But all things, from what we know now, it is not the decision that I would have recommended, and I'm disappointed they did it.
It's difficult, though, isn't it? Because the temptation will always be to err on the side of safety.
It will, but what if the same email comes in tonight? Is it school going to be canceled tomorrow? Is school ever going to start again? You cannot live this way as a country. And I think at a certain point, you have to trust those who are in law enforcement to give you appropriate guidance. And then it's easier for the politicians politically. The human toll is incalculable, but at least if there was something that went wrong, the politicians could say, we only did what law enforcement told us. I really think it's time that we got our heads around this and calmed down enough to make rational decisions.
I suppose the problem is, and I don't know whether it's something that you use, but the cliche that's always used here, has become a cliche anyway, is the good guys have to be right all the time, the terrorists have to be right only once.
And that's absolutely true. But I can tell you, when I was running the Al-Qaeda squad on our Joint Terrorism Task Force, there wasn't a single day that went by when we weren't vetting threats against America, against our allies, against Los Angeles, against all parts of the United States. If we shut down, and by the way, this would have been one of the smaller threats as far as veracity, as validity that I would have seen. If we acted on every single threat, you could essentially shut down the United States. In the same way, if Britain acted on all the threats against them, you couldn't get a cab ride and the tube wouldn't be running.
So we've got to use more judgment. That's what you're saying. We have to take a deep breath and say, OK, we will accept what the authorities, as in the FBI, the police force, whatever it happens to be, we will accept what they tell us.
I think at a certain point you do, because are you telling me that the Los Angeles Unified School District has more knowledge of terrorism than the FBI and the LAPD combined? It comes down to trusting what society is set up to help. It won't be 100%, but it's going to be better than living under a society where everything is shut down. Under this philosophy, an airliner would never leave the ground.
Steve Moore, thank you very much indeed.
We're still trying to re-establish contact with the former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, but so far with no luck, but we're going to keep trying. Meanwhile, breathless, Joe Lynham has arrived back with some business.
A substitute for John Major. Yeah, the retailer Dixon's Carphone has just published their half-year results. Profits up 23% to £121 million. And I spoke to the boss, Sebastian James, a short while ago. I began by asking him whether he was worried about increased competition with online retailers. Excuse the panting.
Well, that's what happens when you rush to the studio.
Yes, it is.
I love working with horses. I love getting into their heads and how they think, and just love working with them.
We are the same price as the internet. We know we're competitive with absolutely everybody in the market, and what people are doing is coming in. In fact, some of them are using the app that we give them to compare prices with everybody else and saying, well, you know what, it's the same price. I know if it goes wrong, I can always bring it back here, and are choosing to buy it from us. And by the way, they can put it in the car and have it right now, which is good for them.
How important is it to you when
big products are launched, I'm thinking especially of a new iPhone, how important in terms of a spike in traffic and business?
Yeah, every other year Apple comes out with a brand new, totally different iPhone, and that's a big deal for us. That's like Christmas in the phone business, and people just flock in to get the newest one, and that's, it's great fun for us, and it's obviously good for business.
But I'm guessing the real profit margins are when you sell service contracts, attached to a washing machine or a dryer or a TV or whatever it is.
No, well, we make good profits. I think what we like doing is selling the latest technology. That's where people buy the latest stuff. They're spending a little bit more money, and we make a little bit more money doing that. And interestingly, when we've done surveys, we find that people who buy the latest stuff are also happier. So it's a kind of win-win-win.
So you're not interested in laggards who buy at the end of the tail end of the market?
I wouldn't call them laggards, but I think the newest stuff is truly magical, and I think being able to enjoy that stuff is good for us and good for them.
You're talking about a new way of dealing with the service side of things, kind of monitoring the products that people have already installed. Tell us how that would work.
Well, we're working on it right now, but we think that one of the things that customers increasingly want in a world where everything is becoming connected, where Wi-Fi, certainly for my teenage kids, Wi-Fi is more important than plumbing, and we want to be the people who ensure that no matter what you've got in your house, we can keep it working for you. Now, we haven't fully developed that, and we'll as we go into next year, we'll be trialling all kinds of stuff around it. But we are excited about that opportunity.
You guys benefit quite a bit when Phones for You left the market, when Vodafone decided to opt for you guys exclusively in the car phone side of the business. That benefited you over the last year or so. Can you continue to benefit in the coming year or so?
We've now anniversaried that Phones for You leaving the market, and so of course you get it once, but you don't get that uplift twice. But I think that generally speaking, we've done, I hope, a really good job of being the place where customers can go and get choice and get a real range of networks and handsets and all that stuff, which is our job.
And that's Sebastian James there, the boss of Dixon Carphone. Excuse the panting before we went into that tape.
That's all right. You had no choice, Joe, because I know that we've got Sir John Major back on the phone, I think. Sir John, is that right?
You have indeed.
I'm sorry, looking back 21 years, it's as if the technology, when you were Prime Minister and I, started with you, I don't know, going back in the world at one with Maastricht, and I think the technology was a bit better then. You were talking about splendid isolation, that was your phrase, for what would happen were we to leave the EU. You know the argument on the other side, very passionately held by many people in your party, although not just in your party, who say this would be independence, it would give the country back the right to govern itself in a proper way, which is something they believe has been ceded over the years to a supranational body. And they think that independence could work in the interests of people in this country. Why do you believe that it wouldn't?
Well, let me point out some of the realities of what would happen if we left the European Union. I mean, let me say firstly, like many other people, I find the European Union often as frustrating as hell. Any slogans that are bankrupt, sometimes an inability to confront problems, very maddening. But I think we are better off, we are safer, we are going to be more prosperous in rather than out, and flirting with leaving, dangerous. Now let me address the particular points that you make. If we left, there must be a high probability that Scotland would have another referendum and leave the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom would be fractured. That would be very damaging. Our international prestige, I think, would suffer. And many of the things we are told we can achieve with a regaining of sovereignty are illusory. Let me run through some of them. People say we can save all our net contribution. Not true. We would have to pay at least half and possibly more of it simply for entry to the single market. They say we can easily negotiate entry to the single market. That's very disingenuous. If we leave the European Union, it won't be a friendly departure. It'll be very acrimonious. Negotiations with an irate ex-partner could be very difficult. We may get a very substandard deal to enter the single market. They say we can control our borders and we'll have no immigration. Well, I don't think that's so. In or out, we can't keep the world at bay. And if we were out, one question arises. In present circumstances, would France be holding so many immigrants at Calais, or would they not? And if not, they would be heading here. We're told our parliament would be sovereign. Well, that, of course, is total nonsense. In order to trade with the European Union, we would have to accept their regulations. We would have no possibility of an input into those regulations or changing them. the Prime Minister will have to go to Parliament and say, here are some regulations the European Union had passed. We must pass them without change or we cannot trade with Europe. So much for parliamentary sovereignty. Now, I could stretch those arguments a good deal longer if you wish, but I think the point is made.
In that case, are you surprised that those around David Cameron are saying that, you know, coming from a political position, an ideological position, if I can put it like that, that's not very different from your own, that he could contemplate coming out, given what you think are, you know, the simple facts of the case, if he is contemplating a potential decision to say, let's leave, it must mean that he, one of your successors, does not accept the case that you've just made.
Well, as I say, you must ask David Cameron that. I can't answer and put this off in his mind. And if I may say so, my experience of, I have sat in his chair and in the European chair. I know the difficult position in which he's in and how he has to negotiate the British national interest and cope with all shades of domestic opinion again. And I have to say to you, James, in my experience of being in his chair, advice, particularly from someone who sat in that chair, is not usually very helpful. So if you're trying to tempt me into giving David Cameron advice, or alternatively to judge what is in his mind, then I'm afraid it will be fruitless.
Yes, because you've had experience of backseat driving.
I've had a great deal of experience of it, yes.
Just let me put this to you. If we are to believe opinion polls and surveys, and of course the campaign for the referendum in a genuine sense hasn't begun yet, but it looks as if it's a pretty even split across the country. Do you believe that that is the position now? And do you believe that there is a greater chance of a vote to leave than there has been in your political lifetime?
There's a lot of frustration with the European Union at the moment, and much of that frustration is entirely justified. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I share the frustration that many people have. But where the debate is truly engaged, and people look at the long-term implications of where Britain would be were it not in the European Union, and examine and understand what it would mean for our future and our children's future and our grandchildren's future, then I think people will move back to realizing that in a world that is interconnected as we are, in a world that is moving together as we are, that we are better off and safer inside the European Union rather than outside. And that is what I believe people will finally conclude. But it is their decision. David Cameron has decided to ask people in a referendum for their view. And I think because of this long-running and tiresome debate, he is entirely right to do so. So it is for the public to decide. But when the facts are before them of what it means, especially in the long run, I believe that they would be advised to stay inside the European Union. And that is what I believe they will vote to do.
Sir John Major, thank you very much, with apologies for that interruption. We got there in the end. Thanks so much.
That's quite right, Jim. And one thing, Jim, if I may, before you go, this is your last morning. And like millions of other people, I have found you and John Humphrys, my daily diet for a very long time. So if I may grab the airways for a moment, I'd like to say I'll miss you. And I think a lot of other people will in the morning. And I will do so because generally you've asked the right questions. Mostly you've listened to the answers. You've done it in an extraordinarily professional way. So I hope as you leave you're proud of what you've done. And whatever you do now, I don't know what you're going to do now, but good luck with it. And I hope our paths will cross.
Well, there is going to be a lot of reporting still going on, some of it in this programme. There will be constitutional matters to be looked at. So, Sir John, I'm glad to say, in responding to you and thanking you very much, that our paths will undoubtedly cross before long. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye-bye.
It's not often one is allowed on this programme to say, I agree with that politician, but actually, I think I agree with that, what he just said. The last bit of it, anyway. The rest of it, of course,
thank you very much.
Anyway, it's now 8:30. Gary Sport.
Jim, John, good morning. The long-term future of Jose Mourinho, I gather, is likely to become a lot clearer in the next 72 hours. His position as manager, the subject of great speculation after he accused his players of betrayal on Monday. Let's check on what England's cricketers are up to. It's the second day of their first tour match. England declared declared on 470 for 5. Taylor 114, Stokes 158. They've been playing for around, half an hour. Henry Moran is watching. What's the latest, Henry?
Well, the South African Invitational 11, 21 for 1 after 6 overs. We saw a wicket in the very first over of the morning. Stuart Broad saw captain Aidan Markram caught well by Alistair Cook at first slip. No runs on the board at that point. Perfect start for Broad. He's bowling with pace and bounce in the baking sunshine here in Potchefstroom. Opening the bowling with him, Surrey's left armer Mark Foote. Not someone England fans will be altogether that familiar with necessarily. He offers genuine speed, firing the ball hard into the pitch, getting good bounce, and of course, being a left armer, he offers that different angle of attack that England have been looking for some time. Not easy conditions these. Hot sunshine around 30 degrees and we're over 4,000 feet above sea level, making the air that bit thinner and those long chases to the boundary just a little bit tougher. So in response to England's 470, the Invitational 11 are 21 for 1 and we're in the 7th over.
Thank you very much. Now at the top of the Championship, just to recap, Middlesbrough and Brighton locked together on 43 points. Middlesbrough beat Burnley 1-0 and Brighton squandered a 2-goal lead and drew 2-2 with QPR. On the opening night of the London International Horse Show, Charlotte Dujardin and Carl Hester made it a British 1-2 in the Dressage Grand Prix. Meanwhile, Scott Brash, Britain's world number 1, who recently won show jumping's biggest ever prize money, just over £700,000, he's in action tomorrow at Olympia. And I've been speaking to Scott Brash.
I love working with horses. I love getting into their heads and how they think, and just love working with them. And I guess my dedication and drive to wanting to be number one and those sort of things has probably brought me the success that it has.
How do you get into a horse's head? What do you mean by that?
Well, unfortunately, horses can't talk, so we have to understand what they're thinking and what they like, how they want to be ridden around a course of jumps. Every horse is different. They all have different personalities, they're like humans, so we have to understand them all, and what works with one horse doesn't work with the next horse, so it's up to us to understand them and get to know them as best we can to get the best results from them.
You've had great success with your horse, Hello Sanctos. Tell me about the relationship, and I'm wondering, you know the horse extremely well, but if another rider who was a very, very good rider like you, would the horse actually know it was somebody different if you were basically, the same weight and everything?
Yeah, for sure, because everyone rides slightly different, and yeah, the pressure from your leg, your hand, your body, everything's gonna, Sanctos is very used to me riding him, so I'm sure if another person got on him and jumped him around a course, he would know, but he's a wonderful horse and he's very experienced now, so I'm sure he could go on to have great success with someone else also.
So literally, as you walk into the stable, the horse will react to you almost on sight, much like another animal, a dog, a cat.
Yeah, they definitely recognise us and my staff who work with Sanctos, for example. If even if we're at a horse show and there's many horses in a line, when they see us walking around the corner, they whinny, they know they're getting fed, and they know who we are.
More immediately for you, it's the London International Horse Show at Olympia this month, and after that the Olympic Games, having won 1 gold medal. What are your thoughts heading to Rio? Because it's not so far away, is it?
Yeah, it always comes round very quick, but we have a very full calendar year now. We're in a different venue all over the world every week. But yeah, it's all eyes on Rio for next year, and we've already started making plans and aiming horses towards Rio next year.
Medal prospects for Rio?
Well, I don't come second anyway, so I will be trying my best for another gold medal.
Scott Brash, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wish that was the attitude of all people involved in horses. Anyway, we'll pass on a couple of selections. Newbury 1240, number 3, Manila Online, Ludlow 240, number 5, Red Devil Lads. Finally, Jim, I gather it's your last morning on the programme. You're giving up after 21 years. Why? you were just getting the hang of it, Jim. Can I say on behalf of all of our listeners, you'll be greatly missed as a presenter on this show. Well done, Jim. Best wishes.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary. And joining us, another presenter. Well, she gave up ages ago, Libby Purvis. She's here, though, because she's got a programme called Midweek, isn't it?
That is right, yes. And we didn't deliberately theme it today on Star Wars and Tim Peake and the day Jim gets blasted into space on the BBC Clockwork Galaxy. But somehow it is today that we have the great astrophysicist Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell. She's going to speak of distant stars and discovering pulsars far, far away and long, long ago. Exploring Earth is Benedict Allen, extreme traveller and tribal initiate, Simon Nicol of Fairport Convention, which has had 20 personnel changes, but nearly always him, and the author of terrifyingly forensic crime novels, Patricia Cornwell. Be very afraid and yet thrilled. Join us just after 9.
By Jove, that's quite a galactic display, Libby. Thank you very much. The weather. I'm glad to say it's going to be a dry and mild day for most of you.
You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with James Naughtie and John Humphrys. The time 25 to 9. A summary of the news from Caroline Nichols.
The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence has published guidance intended to improve the care offered to dying patients in England. It says their individual needs should be respected, rather than a tick-box approach followed. The previous method, the Liverpool Care Pathway, was blamed for the terminally ill people being denied food and water. MPs will vote later on plans to allow fracking under protected landscapes, as long as any shale gas extracted is brought to the surface elsewhere. National parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty, and World Heritage sites would be among the areas affected. Schools in Los Angeles will reopen today after the FBI decided a jihadist threat which caused them to be closed yesterday wasn't credible. More than 1,500 sites were searched as the threat was investigated. The former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, has told us that the UK flirting with leaving the European Union is very dangerous and splendid isolation would be against the country's long-term interests. He was speaking ahead of a European leaders' summit in Brussels tomorrow, where David Cameron will continue his attempts to renegotiate the terms of Britain's EU membership.
23 minutes to 9. It is a year to the day since the Taliban attacked a school in the Pakistani city of Peshawar. They murdered 145 people, including 132 children. The day after the attack, Mishal reported from Peshawar. She was allowed into the school by the authorities.
So as we walk down the steps, there's a very large amount of blood here. And in fact, on either side of the aisles.
And similarly, you can see it on the outer edges of the rows.
It's a shoe that's been left behind. Books that have just been thrown on the side. And more pools of blood and possessions.
Well, today, survivors have been marking the anniversary by attending a special service at the school this morning. And I'm joined on the line now by Ziadun Yousafzai, who is Malala's father and himself, like his daughter, an education activist. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. What has happened at the school since then? Are things pretty much back to normal? And are children, girls in particular, getting the education they need?
Yes, of course. As you mentioned in the report that last year on 16 December, it was the blackest day in the history of Pakistan when 132 children were brutally killed and many more were badly wounded, severely wounded. But the world saw that just a few weeks later, the children went to the same school. They resumed their studies, and it was the resilience of the parents and of the people of Peshawar that it showed to the world that the children and the people of Pakistan, and especially of Peshawar, they are stronger than any fear. And the children went to the same school again, and since then the school is open. And last night we also commemorated in Birmingham the 1-year anniversary of the children, to salute to their sacrifices and to remember them, what happened to them, and to just renew our commitment to eliminate terrorism and extremism in Pakistan.
And that was going to be my next question. Has it been? Well, we know it hasn't been eliminated, but can children, like your daughter, of course, because she almost died at the hands of those terrorists, are they able to go about their education without permanently being afraid?
Yes, this is a very good question, but you see, looking at the global scenario of terror and fear, we can't say that any place in the world is safe now, and it's very difficult to say that everything is all right. But we must say that things have improved a lot in the last 1 year. And last night, Malala Yousafzai just said a very important thing in the commemoration event, that as an operation, military operation is going on, which is called Operation Zarb Azb, to fight against terrorists. She said that to fight against the ideology of terrorism, Zarb Qalam, that means a strike with pen, a fight with pen, is very much important to give a good positive thinking and to give the other side of life to show to the children, to eliminate the ideology of terrorism and extremism.
Well, we wish you well with that, Mr. Yousafzai. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
20-9.
An auditor's report out today is warning that running a deficit appears to be becoming normal practice for NHS hospitals in England. The National Audit Office says that measures other than the extra funding that's been promised by the government may be needed to get trusts back to financial stability of some sort. Well, Rob Webster is the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, which represents NHS Trust. Do you, first of all, do you accept that idea that running a deficit is normal?
I don't think it's normal or desirable. I think it's becoming a position that's found all too often in trusts.
Right, but when I say normal, I mean it is happening, and it's happening routinely now.
The findings of this report are no surprise to anybody working in the NHS at the moment. The question is, what do we do about it?
And the answer is?
Well, the answer is, some of it's found in the report, which I think is a helpful dose of reality around the challenges that face us over the next 5 years. We've been saying for some time that this is the biggest challenge for a generation in terms of thinking about the ways in which we deliver care for people in this country through the NHS and the social care system. So there are some great things in the report about let's plan over a medium-term period rather than from year to year. Let's make sure...
And by medium you mean what, 5 years?
3 to 5 years. So on Friday, we're about to have unveiled what the planning guidance for the health service will be next year and beyond. And what we need to do is stabilise finances in providers next year and provide some additional resources through a transformation fund to make change start to happen, because an effective and an efficient health service requires us to...
So are you saying that the money is there, it's just not being used properly?
Well, what I'm saying is that we're clearly, if you look at the report in detail, providers have been, their financial position's probably been getting worse by...
Hospitals, you mean?
Hospitals, yeah. By just over $1 billion a year. So when they're in surplus, they could cope with that. They started to go into deficit, and that deficit gets worse. That effectively means we need to spend money on things like prevention, targeted care for older people outside
Prevention of what? Oh, you mean stop people getting ill rather than treat them once they got ill? Yeah,
let's do
that. But that's obvious, isn't it?
It is obvious, but the system at the moment doesn't do that well. And that's partly to do with the way that we manage risk across the health and care system in terms of money. And that's partly to do with short-term horizons. And it's partly to do with what the report says about the way that national bodies work with NHS hospitals and what they ask of them. And some of that being conflicting, some of it being burdensome, and some of it stopping us from doing the right thing.
Right, so just in a few seconds, we're just about out of time, as you know. We're not talking about the NHS falling apart, about hospitals falling apart. We're talking about measures that can and should be taken, and they are practical.
Practical steps that need to start immediately to change the way in which we deliver health and care. Some of that's about money next year. More of it is about the way we transform care. The thing that I think will get in the way, we've got a fighting chance of sorting this out, unless we fund social care, which is so important for older people, in the same way that we're building funds for the NHS, we won't have a fighting chance, we'll fail.
Rob Webster, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Coming up to 8:45. For generations, mariners have spoken of freak waves, walls of water that seem to appear from nowhere without any warning at all. Now, oceanographers have generally suggested that the process is a lot more gradual and not as remarkable and dramatic as is sometimes said. There is new research at Oxford suggesting that the sailors, however, have been right all along. Here's an account of the phenomenon written in 1900 by Joshua Slocum, as you all know, the first man to sail single-handedly round the world.
For one day, well off the Patagonian coast, while the sloop was reaching under short sail, a tremendous wave, the culmination, it seemed, of many waves, rolled down on her in a storm, roaring as it came. I saw the mighty crest towering, masthead high above me. The mountain of water submerged my vessel. She shook in every timber and reeled under the weight of the sea, but rose quickly out of it and rode grandly over the rollers that followed.
The words of Joshua Slocum, very dramatic, spoken by Bill Rees, and we're joined in the studio by Professor Thomas Adcock of the Department of Engineering Science at Oxford. What have you concluded?
Well, we've really concluded that what Slocum appeared to see, and indeed what many other mariners have given us accounts of, appears to actually have some basis in reality. That what we've looked at is based on our knowledge of the mathematics and the physics of ocean waves, and we've run many simulations of random waves, and what we seem to see is that actually a wave will to some extent be unexpected.
So you don't get a little one and then a slightly bigger one and then another one that's bigger and bigger, and then, so you say, aha, there's a real whopper coming along. Sometimes you get little waves and then up it comes.
Absolutely. So, and this is particularly in deep water, and so in the middle of the ocean, really. So this isn't what you see if you go down to the beach, but if in the middle of the ocean, if you're sitting there on a boat, not moving very fast relative to the waves, you'll see a couple of relatively small waves. They might still be quite big waves, but in the context of the storm you're in, relatively small waves, then this very large wave will come along because it's really reached the front of the wave packet.
Well, I was just going to ask the dread question. Why?
Well, that's to do with the nonlinear physics and the way
we've only got caught for now, so don't worry about it.
And the way that waves move. That basically bigger waves move faster than smaller waves, so a big wave will kind of gather up the energy as it goes along.
So when a sailor says there was a big wave, it came from nowhere and we had no warning, they might be talking the plain, simple, unvarnished truth.
That's what our simulations appear to say, but we'd really like to get good measurements out in the middle of the ocean, and that's really quite hard at the moment.
There's always a but, or you wouldn't be a professor at the University of Oxford. Thomas Adcock, thank you very much.
It is 13 minutes to 9, and finally, and you can probably guess what I'm about to say, it's au revoir to Jim, not goodbye. Please note, he is not leaving the BBC, and nor is he disappearing from this programme. We'll be hearing regularly from him in his new job, but after more than 20 years of presenting it, he's calling it a day. This is his last one in the presenter's chair. So, for the next few minutes, let's look back and listen again to some of his great moments. Amongst them, you will hear him asking Simon Cowell about his new baby, David Hockney talking about parties, Jim himself reciting some words for snow and finding the waterfall in Liberia that Graham Greene wrote about, and some memorable reporting from Kosovo in 1999, and the two of us broadcasting together for the first time in 1994.
Good morning to you from James Naughtie and John Humphrys. It's Monday, the 28th of February. At night, the fireflies were a string of liquid lights along the road. The stars were clear, the sky was velvet black. A blissful scene. So the crackle of a gun or the sight of a tank lurching round a corner isn't only sinister but strange, as if the whole thing is a mix-up. You simply can't look across the border through the first ravine that carries the road north to Pristina and think easily about a battle that's probably been the most savage in Europe for more than half a century.
I'm not going to be a backseat driver because I think it's very important, and I made this decision.
Having crashed the car, it's difficult.
Thanks.
Above literature, said the Queen. Who is above literature? You might as well say one was above humanity.
It's not a bad line, Alan Bennett, is it?
Well, I think she does come out with some very good lines. That's not one of them, that's one of mine.
I remember that the official buzzword from this week's Communist Party Congress in Beijing is harmony, instruction as encouragement. To be honest, it is rather easier to feel harmonious on the train, though there's nearly no English around, except from some determined British trekkers of advanced years, and quite a lot of Tibetan. You get that collective stab of adventure that trains are made for.
they're not meant to be worthy. They're meant, like I said, to be entertainment shows.
You've got great hopes for your son, obviously, and are very proud of him. You know, some listeners will be saying, oh no, when he's gone, there's another one coming along. You said more than once in the course of the Scottish referendum campaign that you would be heartbroken if Scotland left. What word would you choose to describe your feelings if, under your watch as Prime Minister, Britain left the EU?
I feel about 1,000 times more strongly about our United Kingdom than I do about the European Union.
2 hours still to go before Barack Obama speaks. There's a queue a mile or two long still stretching back into Denver under a cloudless sky as the western sun sinks over there. They know that this is not simply a matter of politics, the celebration of the winning of a nomination, though that it is, and they seem to be at a rock concert as well as a political meeting. Stevie Wonder will be here in a moment. They understand that it is the beginning of the last phase of a presidential campaign which has already become the most remarkable in modern American history. We've found it. We scrambled down through the trees, a rocky, leafy slope there, in an opening in the canopy of the forest that allows sharp, long shafts of sunlight to come darting in and light up the scene. There are butterflies everywhere. There are two women bathing, and we've found the sacred waterfall. Smør, Skalva, Flochin, Fluke, Spitters. A misty moon winks down on the fireworks. A huge crowd is gathered in the dark beside what is a still stretch of water and in truth a low and unimpressive bridge. But it was here at exactly this time, just after midnight, 65 years ago, that D-Day began.
I never leave the house. I mean, I go out to the dentist, the doctors, the bookshop and the marijuana store. But that's it.
And you're on a mile from a party?
Yes, I do. Because I can't hear, that's all. I mean, I'll tell you why at a party. I'd be there, but I'd not be there.
You said that there was a real effort to put things together, to repair things this week. Why do you think, looking back over these years, that effort was necessary?
It was necessary because within the party, or more strictly within the New Labour family, there has been a fissure. I mean, really from the word go.
I heard this morning, I think, that some schools have stopped doing Shakespeare on the school curriculum. I think that there might be somebody who might be suddenly ignited by that and think they'd like to see more of it or hear more of it.
And what would ignite them, let's say, from that play?
I can only remember a bit of it, and I may go wrong on this.
That's okay.
I dreamt there was an Emperor Antony. Oh, such another sleep, that I might see but such another man. His face was as the heavens, and therein stuck a sun and moon, which kept their course and lighted the little O, the earth.
All right.
Yeah, good record.
Here we are.
Mr.
You know
President,
Mr.
James
Naughtie
from the BBC. Very nice to see you again.
This is the most distinguished, President Carter, this is one of the most distinguished broadcasters in the world.
Nobody's recording.
Honoured.
Mr. Naughtie.
Honoured.
And I, in all honesty, love playing with any band, because I was playing. That was what was important.
Ringo Starr talking to Jim, who is extremely proud of that. He's sitting here glowing.
Well, why not? It's taken me 50 years plus to get round to interview a Beatle. So
Well, there you go, Jim. I tell you what, it was extremely difficult to put that together. Not because we struggled to find anything worth putting in it, but because of all the stuff we had to leave out.
Well, of course, the thing, as you know, on this programme is that so much comes your way. You just sit here and it flows towards you in a wonderful, tidal wave, like the one that Professor Adcock was talking about, just comes up from nowhere, and that's the joy of this programme, except when lines go down. As they,
as they did this
It
morning.
was nice to end with that traditional ending of complete and utter silence on the air.
Absolutely.
But you know what it's like. We just sit here and extraordinary things happen.
It's a massive privilege, isn't it? But look, if you'd been putting that together, that few minutes that we've just heard, what would you have put in it, other than what we've already heard? Let's assume that you're happy with that, and you certainly seem to be. You were smiling a lot.
I think there are two things. It was lovely, and that music, which is an old Scottish fiddle tune that I chose on Inheritance Tracks on Saturday Live, is a lovely thing that takes me home. But, I suppose both you and I feel that it falls into two categories, doesn't it? The one is that wonderfully sort of unexpected moment when a political figure, or indeed someone from, any aspect of society, comes out with something that changes a view or tells us something new or surprising, something they shouldn't say, or has a moment's silence, which indicates that we've won because they've found it impossible to answer. There's that. And then there's the business, which I know you love as well, of being on the road and trying to describe what something's like. Because you're there as the eyes and the ears of the listener. And you've just got to explain what it feels like to be at, Obama's nominating speech in Denver in 2008. And if you ask me for the bits that would take me back to that, they would be election trails, they would be the handover in Hong Kong in 1997, Kosovo, Iraq in 2003, and they would be that American race in 2008, the Clinton-Obama fight for the Democratic nomination in particular, and then the election that followed, because wherever your views stand on these matters, that election was one that crystallised so much of what America's about, as you know. And I remember with the producer being in Washington on the Monday, the day before Election Day, and we discovered that Obama had put in an extra meeting in Manassas, one of the cradles of the Civil War, only half an hour's drive from Washington. And we thought we would go for what you would laughingly call his eve of poll meeting. And we couldn't get across the bridge from Washington. And we thought there'd been a car accident. It always happens in the Keystone Bridge, as you know. So we just went back to the studio rather disappointed. And we found that the reason we couldn't get to the meeting was that 95,000 people had turned up. And you realise at the end of everything that race represented, there was something fundamental. Everyone knew there would be disappointment built into it. Presidencies never fulfill everything that they're meant to. But a campaign like that, to be there and to be able to describe it to people and say, this is what it feels like, this is the texture of it, is a great privilege. And that's why you and I do what we do.
Yeah, it's the oldest cliche in the journalist book, isn't it? But it really is a ringside seat, having a ringside seat at history.
Well, and the smell of it, an election night, and, I'll still be doing election programmes for Radio 4. I'll still be on the road for the American election this year. And
tell us what you're doing before we leave this
I'm going to be a special
point,
correspondent for Radio 4, doing essentially whatever I can dig up and what everyone wants to throw at me. But I'll be doing what I love, which is a lot of reporting. And I'll also be doing very regular book interviews and author interviews for this programme and indeed on the news channel, but working right across the programmes on Radio 4. So it's frankly a dream. And it does mean that at 2:58.5, that alarm will no longer go off to get me up in here. It will also mean, I have to say, that you'll have a tidier desk, John.
Well, look, I struggled as to whether I should get into this delicate territory or not.
I knew you would, so I was trying to get there first.
There have been those scurrilous rumours out there, haven't there, about how you lose your scripts and you get the time wrong and you ask very long questions and you chew your coffee cups and you doze off in the middle of the... I mean, look, none of it's true. We both... Confession time.
But, yes, we were all characters, we're all individuals. And I think what I would say to everybody listening, and to all of you who've sent nice messages, thank you very much, that you do get to know somebody at 4 o'clock in the morning.
For better or for worse.
Even if you're on the radio. For better or for worse. And I think this programme, the chemistry with all the presenters that we've all worked with over the years, is just one of the great privileges.
It is, isn't it? And the bits that you really didn't like, apart from getting up early in the morning, the bits you really, or a bit, you've got time to give me. You have 15 seconds left, Mr. Naughtie. I mean, for this bit.
Things I haven't enjoyed.
Yeah.
Oh, getting things wrong. I can't remember who the culture secretary is at the moment, but anyway, we won't go there.
I wasn't going to go there. I think his name was Hunt, but yeah, no, well,
okay.
We'd probably better. Now, look, you've got a minute to say goodbye.
Well,
and from us, Jim, goodbye. We will miss you, I tell you that.
Well,
we will miss you a
Another
lot.
programme ends, and another
pleasure.
day begins, but at 21 years, I suppose it comes to this for me. And in a way, nothing changes. The programme goes on, and as I've just been saying with John there, I'll still be working for Today and other programmes on Radio 4 as a special correspondent. There'll be much more in books and culture. All that continues, and I can't wait for it. But it is inescapably a moment of change, because you can't sit in this chair working with such talented and decent producers without being woven into the fabric of the programme, which I am, and with all the presenters down the years, especially Sarah, Justin and Michelle in recent times, as well as my old friend here, with whom I started and with whom I now finish. I'll be giving them my thanks, but all of you who listen need to be thanked too. You are the programme. Thank you. Our editors were Terry O'Neill and Tim DeFarman. From John and from me, good morning.